everybody, and welcome to your Top Think Tanks review. I am your host, Bryce Dolan. Today we're going to visit 5 of the top 50 United States think tanks, and we're going to visit 5 different articles. First, we're going to begin with the American Enterprise Institute. They shared an article from U.S. News about the forgotten topic of ethanol. Then we're going to move across the sea. The Council on Foreign Relations posted an article that Turkey was taking a major offensive move into Syria at the same time Vice President Joe Biden was making his visit to Ankara. Then moving on to a human rights organization and also a top 50 United States think tank, Human Rights Watch. Now, Human Rights Watch author Mark Hisney asked why there is no outrage on incendiary attacks in Syria. Then the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars tells us how Putin's ever-shrinking circle shows a return to Soviet politics. Then I'll end the show and have the people of the Competitive Enterprise Institute tell you what they think of free speech and why the government cannot and will not suppress that free right. Now, to begin, the American Enterprise Institute, they shared an article from U.S. News addressing the issue of ethanol. Now, in 2004, concern for U.S. energy security and ideas for bioenergy to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions were both escalating issues. Major issues in the political region. We needed to find a solution now. Well, at the time, organizations like the Natural Resources Defense Council supported the production of ethanol. It could be made in the United States, therefore it was secure because we had a guaranteed source of it, and it was predicted to decrease greenhouse gas emissions by 1.7 billion tons per year, reduce soil erosion, improve air quality, and even expand wildlife habitat. Well, now, just more than 10 years later, after the ethanol mandate became law in 2005, the same organizations are kicking themselves for what they were advocating for back in 2005. Why? Well, the use of ethanol has not lowered greenhouse gas emissions at all. It hasn't even improved the air quality. And although the ethanol mandate may not be the entire reasoning behind the increase, it cannot be ignored. The corn production increased in the United States by 15% since the mandate in 2005. Now, like I just said, it could be other reasons that also attribute to this growing number of percentage of corn growers, like increased supply and demand. There's a growing population. Corn is a food and also a main source in a number of different items, of everyday items that I bet you wouldn't even know had corn in it. So these could also be other reasons to attribute to this increase in corn growing in the United States, but in this article they relate it back to the 2005 mandate. Now, in addition to that increase of corn growing in the United States, the U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates that this year will actually be the largest corn crop ever, with 14.5 billion bushels. Now, because of the lack of results from the biofuel, big corn and ethanol industries are really struggling to hold off pressure from both the left and the right sides to end this renewable fuel standard mandate. Now, environmental groups have had enough of the ecological damage, and conservatives, at least the ones not in corn-growing states, are increasingly uncomfortable with a government mandate that funnels tens of billions of dollars into a private, well-organized special interest group. Now, furthermore, America's energy security problems that the ethanol mandate was supposed to fix no longer exist, really. Now, because of the lack of the result of... thanks to the Americans' shale revolution, just after the mandate passed in 2005, U.S. oil production has surged to near record levels in recent years. Now, this completely reverses more than 3 decades of falling domestic production. The U.S. is now more energy secure than it ever has been since the early 1970s, and the fears of eroding U.S. oil production and peak oil that motivated the original mandate are now gone. So I guess you can say the original reasons for having this ethanol around are no longer needed. The U.S. has a secure, for now, has a secure line of energy until we start to fall short of oil again. But for now, we are apparently the most secure in our energy than we ever have been since the early 1970s. Now, moving on to across the sea, we're going to go over to Ankara, Turkey. Now, recently, Vice President Joe Biden made a visit to Turkey just as they were launching the largest military offensive in Syria yet. Now, Biden's visit shortly after this operation was launched was actually a message to show the world that the United States and Turkey remain allies in fighting these militant groups. So it wasn't just perfect timing. I think it was a little bit planned to launch this large military offensive and have Biden come to the country at the same time. Now, the Council on Foreign Relations tells us that Turkey sent tanks, warplanes, and special operations forces into a border region of Syria in an attempt to force the self-proclaimed Islamic State from the town of Jarablus. This show of relations comes at a desperate time for the United States to, in a sense, appease Turkey. Now, President Erdogan of Turkey has requested the extradition of Fethullah Gulen, the Pennsylvania-based cleric who the Turkish president claims was behind the failed coup in July. Now, at the same time, Mr. Biden will privately express American concern at the sweeping crackdown of his opponents that Mr. Erdogan has instigated since that failed coup. Now, these days, however, the U.S. and Turkey don't really see eye to eye on very many things. The two countries are at odds over Syria and the urgency of removing Syrian President Bashar Assad, over support for Syrian Kurds who, in contrast to the Turks, have proved to be reliable U.S. partners in the fight against the Islamic State, over the territorial sovereignty of Iraq, and over continuing sanctions on Iran. Now, though American officials privately acknowledge that Mr. Erdogan is erratic, they have given the Turkish leader extraordinary leverage over U.S. policy. Now, switching over to this Russian side of the Syrian crisis, where our relationship is a little bit more definite. I right now wouldn't call Turkey our ally, but I wouldn't really call them our enemy either. They're kind of, I guess, in that friend zone stage is what you can say. But our relationship with Russia is more or less on the rocks. Now, Human Rights Watch author Mark Hisney expresses his discourse at the lack of attention and criticism Russian incendiary bomb use is receiving. Now, due to their notoriety, there is a tendency to view incendiary weapons as illegal, but under current law, their legality is determined by how they are used. Now, Protocol 3 of the United Nations Convention on Conventional Weapons, otherwise known as the CCW, prohibits the use of air-dropped incendiary weapons in civilian areas. It was created in the wake of the Vietnam War and outrage generated by the photographs of Kim Phuc and other children burned by United States napalm bombs. Now, if you haven't seen this article of Miss Kim Phuc, who this was a very famous photograph. Obviously, it came about to create the CCW. This photograph shows not only Miss Kim, but several other children walking out of smoke from a burning village, crying and burning from the napalm from the Americans. Now, there has been a sharp increase in the use of incendiary weapons in Syria since Russia began its joint military operation with government forces almost a year ago. Now, Human Rights Watch recorded at least 18 incendiary weapons attacks between June and August of this year, and reviews actually report of another 40 possible attacks to come. Now, the actual number of attacks is likely far higher because there are a number of attacks that have gone unrecorded. Now, states should use the CCW's 5-year review conference in December to take meaningful action on these weapons. Most pressingly, states should improve on the weak language proposed by the United Kingdom for the conference, which meekly note concerns at allegations that bombs like these have been used on civilian areas. Now, failure to do so risks condemning hundreds more of Syrians to the horrors of incendiary weapons. Now, this is a huge issue that really needs to be addressed. If they're dropping, in a sense, firebombs in Syria, not just on soldiers, but on civilians, It's no different than what happened years ago in Vietnam. Now, staying on the topic of Russia, but come back more to the political side more than the war side in Syria. Well, Mr. Putin, according to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, hints at Russia becoming more and more like the old Soviet Union. Russia continues to improve their international influence, to attempt to improve their international influence and respect, but it fails to be effective. With the doping scandal in the Olympics, the accusations of hacking United States presidential campaign, and military tensions over Ukraine and Syria, they're not doing a really good job. It seems that all this controversy is overwhelming. It's overwhelming and covering up Russia's September 18th parliamentary elections. Now, this might be exactly what President Vladimir Putin wants. However, the Duma elections 5 years ago sparked unprecedented protests over fraud and Putin's unilateral decision to return to the presidency. Now, he has been clamping down ever since. Now, despite all this exciting activity for Russia, there has been a certain trend of the comings and goings of Russian officials. Hisne writes, most notably, the people who built Putin's system are on their way out, replaced by people of the system. Well, this is what he means. It may not sound like a huge or major change, but it is. Current officials or the older generation who helped build the Putin system have a combination of intelligence and street smarts and toughness that was needed to survive during the chaotic post-Soviet environment. Now, in contrast, the replacements have only known the relative stability of the Putin era and remain largely untested in times of crisis. Their inexperience may yet to come to the forefront. So as the old guards move on, sometimes voluntarily, other times in disgrace, Putin has replaced them with younger, more loyal functionaries, primarily from the security services, but also from his personal entourage. The acting governors of Kaliningrad and Tula are former Putin bodyguards. The new head of the presidential administration, Anton Vaino, came from Putin's protocol office. Now, Putin has appointed loyalists and functionaries, not reformers or visionaries. These trends point to continued stagnation, which is probably the best case scenario for the Russian economy and Putin's political system. Now, the Duma elections may yet produce a surprise as in 2011, but that appears even more unlikely with these officials moving out. Now, instead, Russia may actually have to relearn a lesson that many thought had been definitively learned 25 years ago with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Elite competition is no substitute for real politics. So as the Russians and Mr. Putin are going more towards another Soviet era, we will see what happens there. We have been kind of keeping track of Russia and Mr. Putin as we go along in these segments, and doesn't look like we're going to run out of any material anytime soon, ladies and gentlemen. Now, to end this show, we are going to visit the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I started reading an article they posted on their website that I found extremely interesting. It was about the freedom of speech. I didn't just find the article interesting. I found a video that was posted along with it just as interesting and compelling. Now, I could talk about it and I could summarize the article, or I can let the Institute tell you in their own words.
No American should fear being singled out and harassed by a government official who takes a different point of view on public policy questions.
President Obama's Justice Department may be going after your business if he does not like the way you think about global warming.
Democratic attorneys general from more than a dozen states fired off subpoenas seeking decades of records from climate change skeptics, including the Competitive Enterprise Institute.
What's happened here is unlawful and it's un-American.
This is what happens when you can't win a debate. They couldn't pass it through Congress, so instead they're imposing their agenda on everyone else.
Our first reaction was Hell no, this thing is one unconstitutional fishing expedition. The real thing that they're after is to shut down the global warming debate.
The reason these prosecutors have targeted CEI is it's not really even about the research or the documents. It's about sending a message to CEI and all the other groups that were included that if you go out and you get engaged in a cause with which we do not agree, we're going to make you face political costs, we're going to make you face legal costs, we're going to wrap up your time dealing with subpoenas, we're generally going to make your life very, very difficult.
They are set upon sending a signal that certain types of speech and the promotion of ideas in political discourse in the public sphere is off limits. And it's off limits to the degree that they're willing to punish it.
CEI has been great because when faced with the prospect of this muzzling and the subpoena that it received, instead of just meekly turning over documents, it stood up and it managed, as a result of the action it took, to get one of the lead prosecutors in this to back off. This is a model that other nonprofits should be following because it's the only way to make bullies stop in the end, is to call them out on what they're doing.
Our job is to defend the rights of speech and to make sure those who are the enemies of speech are held accountable.
Now, if you really want to get into the details of what they were really going after with their climate change basis and their reform and everything else that they were basically fighting for, and the government tried to shut them down, you can find all the details to that in the article on the Competitive Enterprise Institute website. Along with that article, you can find the rest of these articles and their links down below in the description. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a like on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. But until next time, I was your host, Bryce Dolan, and this was your Top Think Tanks Review.